Trying to make a fictional world feel like a real place is a complex and daunting task. If any one of a million different things goes wrong, the illusion is tarnished or broken. One common stumbling block for futuristic fiction, for instance, is its tendency to paint an overly uniform picture of the future. In these stories, it can be as if all traces of the past have been erased. Every building is a glass skyscraper, every surface has a million lights coming out of it, every car is a self-driving hover car, every toothpick is made of nanobots, and toilet paper is presumably Wi-Fi enabled. Nothing old or low-tech is to be seen unless deliberately framed as a retro affectation, perhaps out of fear that combining elements from different time periods makes it too difficult for audiences to date a specific setting. But the real world doesn't work like this. When I walk through the streets of Vienna, where I live, I see modern architecture butt up against buildings that have been around for centuries. I see two different types of trains operating our tram lines, one from the 60s and one from the 90s. If I reach into my pocket, I do find a handheld computer, but it rests there alongside old-fashioned metal keys and paper money. There are attempts to replace everyday items such as watches, wallets, and light bulbs with expensive high-tech alternatives, and more of these gadgets are being pitched on Kickstarter every day. But even in wealthy regions of the world, most people continue to use the economic and reliable versions that have existed in close to their current form for decades or centuries. The truth is that the future does not erase or replace the past, but builds on top of it, so that the world we live in at any given time is a combination of new and old objects and ideas. Understanding this fact is perhaps one of the greatest narrative strengths of Overwatch, Blizzard's wildly successful team-based shooter. Which might not be saying all that much. This being a multiplayer shooty thing, the game's narrative tends to take a backseat to the player's own internal narrative of winning a particularly close match or getting even with another player after being killed by them a bunch of times. So all that lore and character development you see in cinematic trailers has very little impact on the moment-to-moment gameplay, which might see sworn enemies team up to kill their best friends or copies of themselves. Despite the forced alienation of having to play this game online with other human beings who curse and complain, however, it's clear that the game's world building and environmental design are informed by a strong sense of purpose and great attention to detail, which players appreciate for exactly 1 minute while they are locked into the spawn room, and then the bunny hopping begins. But we don't talk about ludonarrative dissonance on this channel because that concept is trite and overused and would probably be for the best if it fell into a bottomless pit, so let's just move on. Overwatch, in case you don't know, is set about 60 years into the future in a world reshaped by a robot uprising. It features elements such as mechs, cyborgs, lasers, jetpacks, teleporters, shield generators, and hover cars. These futuristic technologies play an important part in the game's design, but they are also paired with a lot of contemporary elements and contrasted with downright historical settings such as ruins, temples, castles, and brick-and-mortar cinemas. This combination of elements from different time periods makes Overwatch maps feel rooted in familiar history while giving them a believable, lived-in look. Take a map such as Route 66, for instance. The whole place is immediately recognizable to us as a piece of 20th century Americana, although one that has been subtly updated with futuristic elements such as the hover bikes parked in front of the saloon. Other games might have avoided this kind of mix and matching for fear of confusing their players, but Overwatch embraces this sense of temporal disorientation as a realistic element, given that it is a feeling we can also get from traveling around the real world. Take the Panorama Diner, for example. Players on the attacking team start inside this 40s style diner, and at first glance, you can't even tell if this place is supposed to be from that period or just trying to recreate it. Only small details like the digital menus and signs about Omnics reveal the place as a case of retro design, likely a tourist venue that deals in nostalgic glorification. The Panorama Diner also illustrates how complicated it can be to trace the winding path of cultural influences and references. In Overwatch, we have a contemporary game that's set in the future, which then points back into the past. But more than that, it points back to a period of the past, the onset of the atomic age, that was itself defined by its optimistic view of the future, the idea that technological progress would bring peace and abundance for all. There's a reason why the aesthetics of this period work so well for the retrofuturism of the Fallout games. They were never truly of their own time. This complex web of temporal references is the reason why homogeneous portrayals of the future feel so unsatisfying. It's an ahistoric way to represent the period as if it was a disconnected and entirely self-absorbed slice of time. And that's just not how human culture works. At no point in human history did our culture rest fully in itself. It always looked to the past for inspiration and imagined what the future might be like. But Overwatch goes one step further than this. Many of its maps even take you on a sort of trip across time, either from the past to the future, or from the future to the past. In Route 66, players start in a retro diner and end up in a warehouse full of modern weapons. In Volskaya Industries, players start in a library and end up in an automated factory for giant mechs. In Ilios, players start on a futuristic dropship and then fight over Hellenic ruins. This kind of progression allows the game to place its players in familiar environments at first and then introduce them to the new elements of their setting over time, by using the space of the map to retell the story of the game's world on a small scale. So even if you go into this game without any knowledge of the lore that has been established in its promotional material, you can glean just about everything you need to know about this setting from its environment. This is an enormous achievement, and has only been made possible by Blizzard's understanding of how different parts of history shape the present we live in. And yet, there are some downsides to this approach that are worth talking about. The main reason Overwatch manages to clearly distinguish different locations and different time periods is because it reduces them to their most widely known cultural markers, which is to say the game draws very heavily on clichés and stereotypes. The game takes you to a variety of different settings drawing on different parts of history, but they all look like touristy caricatures of themselves. Overwatch's version of Greece is all ancient ruins and white and blue houses. Its version of Germany is a brewery surrounded by half-timber houses. Its version of Japan is an arcade in the Sengoku period castle. Its version of England is Dickensian streets and... Wait a minute. Does that clock tower have a digital face? Okay, maybe the game does get a little silly with its use of futuristic technology. The use of clichés in the game's environmental design is somewhat balanced out by its large and diverse cast of characters. By filling its roster with heroes from just about every country you visit in the game, Overwatch mitigates the impression that it uses different cultures for flavor and set dressing. Beyond the sense of agency and self-expression the game's mechanics afford its characters, this approach also encourages us to view its various maps not as reductive renderings of real places, but as extensions of the fictional backstory of its characters. Russia isn't just a snowy place with onion-domed towers, it's also the home of Zarya, the badass bodybuilder. Still, there's no denying that Overwatch's indiscriminate borrowing of cultural symbols takes the game into some questionable territory. Pharah's Native American skins drew a lot of criticism, for instance, which Blizzard recently addressed by more or less confirming that her father is Native American. Whether you see this as a clarification or a convenient retcon, it still leaves plenty of debatable material such as Roadhog's Islander skin, Symmetra's Goddess skin, or this Lunar New Year themed highlight intro for Tracer, the peppy British hero. I don't have time to go into detail on this subject, so I'm putting links to 2 articles on Killscreen and Go Make Me a Sandwich in the description below. It feels weird to be so thoroughly impressed with a game's aesthetics in one regard, and so deeply disappointed with them in another, but it just goes to show that even if you completely nail one part of your design, you might still mess up somewhere else. There's a deep-seated fear in gaming communities that this kind of criticism is intended to ruin your enjoyment of problematic material, but nothing could be further from the truth. Not only can we still go on to enjoy the game while being mindful of its flaws, we can also stay mindful of its flaws while celebrating its successes. For instance, Overwatch's design veers into the territory of cultural appropriation at times, and yet it is also one of the few mainstream games to provide us with optimistic depictions of the future of the African and Arab world. It is entirely possible to learn both from a game's mistakes and its strengths. Despite the postcard optics of its levels, Overwatch's environmental design is clearly one of its strong suits. The amount of cultural references it layers into its maps are not only a sign of great craft, but also the amount of faith it puts into its players, who it trusts to spot and appreciate all these little details, even if they are not highlighted in any way. And yes, we're talking about the same players who spam emotes and yell at their teammates, but don't let that fool you. If you take your audience seriously and show them respect, they might surprise you. They might even remember to get on the payload, eventually.
Administer.